Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Camilla Cava Food Photography Podcast, a place where I interview talents in food photography industry to learn ins and outs to help you and myself grow food photography career. In this episode, I'm speaking with food photographer Darina Kopcok. She is also food photography teacher at Vancouver Institute of Media Arts and contributing writer to Pro Edu and Digital Photography School. When researching about stock photography, I came across her article, Selling Photos: How to Make Money from Photography. It was an inspiring and educational article to me, and so I decided to invite Darina on my podcast. She tells us a lot about stock photography, how to approach it, what is the difference between micro stock and premium stock, what stock companies are out there, and even more. So, without further ado, let's welcome Darina.
Hi, Darina. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so
I'm
much
very
for
excited
having
to have
me.
you here. Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely.
Thank you. It's great to
So,
be here.
yay. So, for the listeners that might not know you, could you tell a little bit about who you are and what do you do?
Okay, so my name is Darina, and I'm a food photographer based in Vancouver, British Columbia, in Canada, and I'm also an educator. So I educate in food photography at a local art college here, and I also do online mentorship and coaching, that kind of thing, with emerging photographers, and also do some writing for various websites and product creation, like my own ebook. And so it's really a combination of food photography and teaching about food photography.
Right. And how did you become a food photographer? How long have you been photographing food?
So I've been photographing food since 2009, so it's been a while. It hasn't been full time that whole period, but it's a bit of a long story, actually. I started 2009 with the economic downturn. I had lost my teaching job at the time, like a lot of people, and started food blogging actually at that time. So I came to photography through food blogging. I had been a writer in the past. I did my education in creative writing and thought that I should do something with my writing on the side while I was looking for a job and basically retraining for a new career at the time. And started writing for some food magazines because I'd already, really enjoyed food and had always been cooking and that kind of thing. And I started the blog as really a writing project and a way
Mhm.
for editors to be able to see my writing while I was pitching. But it became very clear early on that I actually enjoyed the food photography more than I enjoyed the writing or blogging or creating recipes. So I was never actually a very good, consistent food blogger. So I decided to go to photography school because I was struggling quite a bit with the technical side and teaching myself. So I had retrained for a new career as a career counselor and started going to photography school. So it took me several years to do that while I was working full time, but eventually graduated and then basically just started my business full time about 5 years ago now.
Wow,
And
right,
been shooting full time since, and then slowly getting back into, teaching and mentorship because that
right.
is basically what I was doing before I even started photography. I had a background in teaching, went to school for career counseling and coaching, so I brought those skills in to what I do as well as the writing.
Wow,
Yeah.
right. Interesting. Um, so actually, I wanted to ask, how did you become better in food photography?
I really think that it's something that even if you've been shooting for years, like I have, that you always need to practice and shoot as much as you can, especially with food. You might not actually have the chance to shoot a lot unless you create that time for yourself. Whereas other photographers, maybe like portrait photographers, they always need a person as a subject, right? Um, and they need to organize that. But you can shoot at home because you don't really need a lot of space. And whether you're working full time or you have a part-time job, there's always time that you can carve out for yourself to do that. And I think it's also really important to keep educating yourself. When I first started out, there really weren't very many people teaching about this or talking about
Right.
this. The
Hmm.
resources, even for learning at home, were very, very limited. Again, this is one of the reasons why I did decide to go back to school. Like this was like about 2011 at the time when I started
Hmm.
um, learning more about the technical side of photography. And there are so many more resources and teachers available now to take advantage of that. So I think
Yeah,
it's really a combination of learning from others that are a few steps ahead of you and practicing as much as you can, whether you have
definitely.
clients or not, right? Because I noticed for
Yeah,
myself that if I get really busy with, teaching and clients and other things that I'm doing, and I'm not shooting as much, it's almost like I feel like I'm not in the flow or a little bit rusty after a week or two of not shooting
yeah,
all the time, right? So
true.
I think it's just really important to practice your craft as much as you can.
Yeah, and constantly shoot. Yeah,
Yeah, constantly
not only
shoot.
for clients, but also for portfolio, which I think is
Yeah.
also important.
Yeah, for your portfolio. And then again, with clients, one thing that I find as a food photographer is that I'm not actually working with clients as many other photographers might work with clients, because there's so much that goes into a commercial food shoot, right? There's the pre-production, post-production, meeting with clients. So if you're doing, 4 shoots in a month, that could be a lot, right? That's usually the most that I ever want to do. Whereas for a portrait photographer, they might do 4 in a week quite easily, right?
Yeah,
So when you're shooting for clients, it just might not be as often, and it is 3 or 4 times a month enough practice to improve your photography. It might not be, right?
yeah, especially in the beginning. I agree.
Mhm,
Yeah,
mhm, yeah.
yeah, makes sense. Yeah,
Hmm.
because I was very curious to speak to you as well because I think your portfolio is so gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
I saw on the
Thanks so
website.
much.
It's wonderful. But to be honest, how I found you is because I read an article that you wrote,
Hmm.
which is called "Selling Photos: How to Make Money from Photography."
Hmm.
So I really, right now, really want to dive into that topic with you.
Great.
And obviously, things are very different now because of COVID-19.
Hmm.
So I'm curious to kind of compare and talk about how you were doing before the
Okay.
crisis hit
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
how it is right now. And the first thing is selling stock images,
Hmm.
because I know you've been selling stock images. So I
Hmm.
was wondering, how did you jump onto it? How does it work? And how it is now with the crisis here.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'd love to expand more on that. So
Mhm.
when I started my business, as I mentioned, I wasn't one of these people that just, um, went from part time to full time. I basically jumped in, went full time. Yet my approach to business from the very beginning, and I even, wrote a business plan and I mapped it all out, was to create multiple income streams, right? So even back then, I had a business coach. I had a business coach that specialized in photography, and he had a contact at Offset. So Offset is a premium stock agency. They're a division of Shutterstock, and I had never really heard of them because they were pretty new at the time, like maybe less than a year or so. And they had a very different pricing model from other agencies in that they had one price for a royalty free low res image, and they had another price for a high res royalty free image, and you got a percentage of that, and that was that, right? So it wasn't micro stock, and so the prices were a lot higher, which means the commissions were better. So it was like very straightforward, and they had quite a high standard for the images that they would accept. And I decided to apply. And after a while, it takes a little while for them to get back
Uh-huh.
to you. I had been accepted, and then I went on also to sign up with Adobe Premium, and Adobe Premium it's Adobe, but it's a division of their larger stock agency that's premium as well. And currently, I'm also with Stocksy, which is more of I guess like a mid-priced agency that offers not only royalty-free, but also rights managed. And I can, get into the difference um,
Mhm.
about that if you like as well. But that's basically how I got started, and it's something that I continue doing to this day. Again, I think it's really important to practice no matter what level you're at, and that's one of the things that I use as a repository for my photos. Basically,
Right.
my my practice images.
Yeah, yeah.
um, yeah.
Right. Because premium stock, can you tell a little bit more about it?
Yeah. So basically, there was a time, maybe 10 years ago or more, when photographers that could actually make quite a bit of money from stock photography, several $1,000s a month perhaps. And then, with digital getting more and more saturated and
Yeah.
more competitive, micro stock came along as basically high volume and low budget sales, right? So their target market has always been more of the lower budget, tends to be just internet only.
Hmm.
um, I think when we look at some of those stock photos, we realize it's a stock photo. It has a certain type of production value, whereas premium stock, I guess Offset was really a trendsetter in this way when they started in 2015, because they were basically mining the archives of successful commercial photographers. And that's how I think they got a lot of their initial photographers working with them, was by approaching them,
Hmm.
researching, seeing the portfolios. And they have always marketed themselves as um, like higher level photography, higher resolution. A lot of my stuff gets printed in cookbooks and magazines, rather than internet. So
Hmm.
the market is quite different, between micro stock and premium. And as a photographer, it's definitely more difficult to get into because they have a higher standard of
Right.
what they will accept aesthetically. And then there's
Hmm.
also other factors in terms of, well, what is selling right now, and what is going to sell long term, and so forth, right? And assessing if the photographer has, a feeling for that and is submitting
Hmm.
those kinds of things that will sell.
Right.
So that's basically the difference. And then, as I mentioned, I'm with Stocksy, and I would say that they're more of a mid-priced agency where you can get royalty free images or you can get rights managed images, whereas Offset and Adobe Premium, they're more about the royalty free,
Hmm.
although you can I believe that clients can approach them and ask to purchase the rights for a certain time frame, and then that's negotiated with the photographer, but it's not actually advertised on their website.
Right. And what kind of rights we're talking about then? Like a
Okay.
copyright?
So basically, you as a photographer, you always own the copyright to your
Yeah.
photos. So when you're working with a stock agency, you're not actually selling the photos. So we always use the word selling because that's what we're used to and it's easier. But what you're actually doing is you're licensing your photo. So you keep the copyright and you are allowing a client to use the image for a certain purpose for a certain time frame.
Hmm.
So, with royalty free, if a client purchases your image, it's usually for quite a low price, but their competitors can also come along and purchase those same images to advertise their products. And therefore, they don't have that exclusivity that's really important to a lot of clients, and that clients usually get when you're doing a photo shoot for them, for example,
Yeah.
right? So when you're doing a photo shoot for a client, you should be charging, a creative fee or a photographer's fee for your work, your labor, but you should also be charging a licensing fee. And that licensing fee um, basically gives them the security that you're not going to take those same images and sell them on stock photography or sell them to their to competitors, right?
Yeah.
This is something that's, I know also you've spoken to other guests about this
Yeah, definitely.
sort of thing. It's, it's very tricky, but it's something that photographers should be doing, and many have not been doing because they've not
Yep.
have the knowledge about it or how to do this. So this has created a lot of problems in the industry. But if you go onto a stock like Stocksy, for example, that does sell rights managed licenses and royalty free licenses, you'll see that for a royalty free license, perhaps the client can buy a large image for 30 US dollars. But if they want to license that image exclusively just for 6 months, that price goes up to about 1,200 US
Right.
dollars, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that gives you an idea of what the value of exclusivity is, right?
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah. So,
definitely.
but I would say that um, that's probably not a common occurrence for a lot of photographers these days, especially in the last few years, for clients that are actually buying stock photography. Most of the time, they just want royalty free. Maybe something to put in a magazine, or they want to create a banner for their website or have other images on their website. And really
Mm-hmm.
depends, right? Like, so again, I mentioned with offset, I notice that a lot of my files that are sold through them are high resolution, and that tells me that they're being printed, right?
Nice. Yeah.
Whereas from other sites, if I'm selling for a lot lower price, low res, then I can assume that they're being bought to be used online.
Yeah.
So So yeah,
Right.
that's the important distinction is, does the agency just sell royalty free, or do they do royalty free and rights managed? And
That's
another
very
example
interesting.
of that would be Stock Food. So Stock Food is, I think their headquarters actually is in Germany, but they might have an office in the US, and they also deal in royalty free and rights managed. And they're usually a good stock agency that a lot of people start with. But again, to
Mm-hmm.
me, it's kind of they specialize in food, but it's a little bit more almost on the Microsoft
Micro.
microstock
Yeah.
microstock side,
Uh-huh.
because of the
Right.
pricing. So the pricing is lower, the commissions are
Mm.
lower. But if somebody's interested in stock photography, that could be a good place to start.
Good
And, there's
start.
other
Right.
agencies as well. There's LMA, there's the Picture Pantry. They specialize just in food, and I think they're in the UK, and they work with like a select number of food photographers and food bloggers as well. So there are quite a few agencies out there. You just have to do your research.
Right. Very
Yeah.
interesting. And
Hmm.
how would you say, what would be your tips to actually get into the stock agency? What kind of images mostly are we looking for? Is there anything that works better, or doesn't work,
Hmm. Hmm. So
or
that's
what
a
do you
good
have to
question.
apply even?
So to apply, you need to have some images for them to look at closely. I imagine that they're
Makes
looking at
sense.
the images from a technical perspective and an aesthetic
Mm,
perspective. So once you apply, it takes a little while for them to get back to you because they usually have to, have a whole team look at it and discuss it because they tend to just work with perhaps a limited number of photographers. They don't necessarily take everybody. It just depends on um, what they're looking for and the level of photographer and so forth. But one thing that I've noticed from doing this for a few years now is that the images that tend to sell are very generic. So what I mean is images that could be used for a variety of purposes. So for example, fruits and vegetables. and
Right.
really basic, like healthy dishes, maybe granola or a bowl of oatmeal, those kinds of things, rather than recipes, right? Like
Mm.
um,
Hmm.
something more specific that way. Lately, I've really noticed that there's been a surge in, especially, yeah, the healthy type of foods and dishes and things like smoothies or,
Right.
zoodles, zucchini noodles, oatmeal, those kinds of things, and also more like keto diet, I guess,
Interesting.
based
So
food,
very
right?
trendy food, basically.
Yeah, so there are
Uh-huh.
trends because there's always, trends in food like, kale and again
Definitely.
spiralized, noodles, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Vegan food, plant-based food is very popular
Super. Yeah.
right now. So it's really looking at what the trends are and creating fairly simple images to submit, I guess, for the most part, or common images, whether they be more western food or
Hmm.
other types of food, uh, usually just like popular kind of
Food.
images
Hmm.
in terms of diet and also um, ingredients, I guess I would say.
Makes
Ingredient
sense.
images, yeah.
Right. And in terms of a style, would you say there is, or would you happen to know if there is a big difference between applying, let's say, moody shots or very light and airy,
I would
kind of?
say, I would say really, really it depends. I noticed that with my sales with Offset that I do tend to sell more of the moody images for some
Interesting.
reason.
Hmm.
And moody imagery is something that I tend to be more known for and produce
Same
more
here.
than.
That's why I'm
Yeah,
asking. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
curious.
yeah.
Because I
So
imagine it's the other way around. Actually, I imagine airy ones would be more like popular, especially with editorial, but apparently.
yeah, actually, I
Mhm.
think, and that's my experience with other agencies as well, that the, brighter, lighter, airier are more popular. But then I did notice that with Offset that I do tend to sell more of the moodier images and they're being used for print. So yeah, that's interesting. So I think,
Interesting. Hmm.
perhaps for cookbooks, that those
Right.
kind of images are popular right now because I think there's a lot of the whole kind of like rustic sort of,
Hmm.
homemade sort of look is really popular in cookbooks right now. So that could be one of the reasons.
Yeah, that's also one of the trends right now, indeed.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Okay, and in terms of the commissions, how does that usually look like? Because I only, from the stock photography, I only tried micro stock, and
Hmm.
then I sold one of my images like 10 times or something, and then I got like €3 out of it, which I was very angry about. And that's why I decided to take away the stock photography and not do it. And apparently, there's something more special like with premium stock. So I'm
Hmm.
curious, how does that work in terms of a payment system?
Okay. So basically, how they pay you is that you get a commission, you get a percentage of the sale. And unfortunately, I can't tell you what the commissions are according to, my
Right.
contracts, but you do get a percentage, and the percentage varies according to which agency you're with, right? But with Microstock, if they're selling the image for, just a few dollars and they're giving you a percentage of it, then it's not going to be that much. So,
No.
in general, I don't really recommend microstock for food photographers because for food photography, not only do you have to invest in the cost of the food to actually take the shots and, of course, props and all of those other things and the
Yeah.
cost of your gear, your time to style it and shoot it, as we talked about before, food photography does take a lot of time, right? And when you're doing a shoot for a client, for example, as I mentioned earlier, that could, take up a week of your time. And then if you're going to be shooting 10 photos for your stock portfolio, that might take you a day or two. And then if you're going to get $5 or
No.
$10 or €10 for
Yeah.
that, right? It's not really worth it, right? So
No.
But the important thing to remember about stock, whether you are going into premium stock or more of like a mid-priced range or something like Getty, it really is a long game. And what I mean by that is that it's something that you have to commit to for doing consistently over several years to really start making a good income from it.
Right.
So it's something that I recommend that you not focus on, but you not neglect either, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the way that I approach stock photography, I look at it as my practice time. I buy food that I'm probably going to want to cook and eat anyway, or, fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, those kinds of things that sell really well. And I use that time as my practice time, my time to practice my even editing, retouching practice and hone my workflow. So I try to look at it as something more than just stock. It's something that I'm also doing for myself as an artist and improving in my photography. I submit those images and I try to, work on this every week or at least every couple of weeks and be consistent about it. And that being said, I still don't have, several thousands of images um, after a few years. It does give me some good income that makes a difference in my budget for sure, but it's not something that I really could live on at this point, right? And I know some photographers are making a very good living after a few years, but they do shoot a lot and they do
Right.
submit a lot, but it takes a few years to get to that point where you could actually be making several thousand dollars from stock
Mm-hmm.
photography. So um, it's not like it used to be, and it's also I think really important to diversify, right? That you're not just with one agency, that you're with two or
Right.
three other agencies. And this is another important point is that most of these agencies want exclusivity, right? So, for example, if I submit to Stocksy, I cannot submit any images from that shoot to another agency, and I certainly can't submit the same images to another agency because if that client wants to purchase that image exclusively, they can't do that because it's floating around out there
Right.
somewhere,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
With Offset, I have a non-exclusive contract. So with the images that I have submitted to them, I also have submitted them to Adobe Premium. I also license them myself, and my agent also licenses um, them through her website. So I'm able to expand the number of sales that I can make that way. Uh, Although there are some photographers that do have an exclusive agreement with them, and I think there's more marketing efforts made on their behalf through the agency. I'm not sure, but I think that's the case. But for me, I get more benefit from being able to sell at least some of my images through different channels. So that's just one thing
Right.
for people to keep in mind if they're actually applying for stock agencies, that a lot of them will demand image exclusivity. So you can't sell them in different places.
Right.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, if they demand image exclusivity, how does it help having more agencies to sell through?
Well, basically, it means that you have to shoot more, right? You have to, um, one of the ways that I like to approach it, for example, would be to have the same subject, but shoot it two very different ways when I am doing a photo shoot and then submit them to two agencies.
Right.
When you're doing that, you just have to make sure that the images aren't similar. But there's nothing wrong with using the same subject, right? So if I'm using a chocolate cake, I might do a moody shot with quite a bit of props and a rustic feel, and then I may take that same chocolate cake and do like a lighter, brighter sort of treatment and submit that to another agency. So that way you can
Makes
actually
sense.
spend a little less on ingredients and get more mileage out of those images. So
Makes sense.
yeah, because one
So,
thing that I find also is that I might have a lot of sales with one agency one month and not very many with another at the same time, and then the next month it'll be reversed. And that's actually quite common,
Right.
I hear as well. So that's one reason why it's good to be with more than one agency, because the sales are up and down, right? Some you might not have very many or none, and then other times, depending on the time of the year or the month, it could be quite a bit higher, right? For example,
Right.
summer tends to be a bit slower in terms of sales.
Interesting. So that way you kind of get stability in a bit of your income.
Hmm. Yeah,
Makes sense.
yeah, for sure.
Interesting.
Hmm.
So this is stock selling of images is something you recommend to other food photographers
Um,
in
it's
general.
it's something that I have been recommending for uh, students of mine that I work with, that are a certain level. I think it is a good way to make some side income and market yourself, have your work out there. But if you're thinking, oh, this is going to make you a living, then that's probably not going to happen for quite a while without a lot of effort on your part. So it's something to think about. But I do think there have been good benefits to it. The problem right now is that the industry is really challenged with COVID-19 and what's happening in the world right now. And things have changed very, very quickly. And from what I know, talking to other photographers and people that I know within some of these agencies, is that an unprecedented number of photographers are applying to get into these agencies right now, because so many photographers are no longer working, gigs have been canceled. Photographers that
Right.
maybe are very established and never considered stock photography before, and their images are a really high level, they're also applying for stock photography. So if this is something that you want to do right now, it might be a lot more difficult to get in, and it might take you a long time to get any response. They're really inundated with applications from what I hear right now, because photographers are just looking for a way to make some income, because some of them have
Yeah.
lost like all possible income at the moment. So
Yeah,
that's one thing
certainly.
to consider. Um, the other thing is, seems that the sales for food in particular have gone down quite a bit. I've noticed that with my own portfolio. I think the advertising dollars for um, food might actually not quite be there right now, although I think that is starting to come up, especially in terms of, again, those healthier foods, right? I think a few months ago, companies had their images set, or for magazines, they had images already chosen for future issues that were going out. And now I think there's maybe a trend towards healthy eating at home and cooking, that kind of thing. So I think
Yeah.
those will come up again, so that's positive. Um, but I also think that right now that food photographers are better positioned than a lot of other photographers, because we can work at home and
Certainly.
we can create images, especially if we do have some good food styling skills, which hopefully most of us do. We're able to work alone in isolation and produce content, right? And I
Yeah,
think one of the things that is going to happen, it's really hard to predict what is
of
happening
course.
with the economy and how it's going to bounce back. But I know from losing my job in 2009 and observing what was happening economically at that time and after, and photographer friends that have worked through a couple of recessions, that things tend to bounce back. And then when they bounce back, they actually bounce back quite hard, because everybody all of a sudden needs content, and it gets so busy that it's actually even hard to find food stylists and assistants and other staff, because they're already booked out on other projects. So that's one thing
So,
that I'm
fingers
hoping is
crossed
going to
that's gonna
happen.
happen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm hoping that, yeah, there's going to, business needs to go forward. The food
true,
industry, in some ways, is very challenged right now, but there's other parts or sectors of the food industry that are doing very well.
true.
And a lot of clients are actually looking for images online. So food-based product photography is something that food photographers right now are positioned very well to explore. It's just a matter of, being able to market those services and going after those clients. So that's one positive area, I think. One positive
Yeah.
thing for food photographers right now, as
Yeah.
opposed to wedding photographers or
Oh
event
yeah.
photographers. Yeah,
They lost all their business right now.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's a
So
shame.
unfortunate. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, that's indeed true. And that's indeed very exciting. And fingers crossed that's indeed what's gonna happen.
Yes,
Because
yes. Fingers crossed, definitely.
yeah, difficult. Okay, that's very, very interesting. I learned so much about stock images and selling your images. It's a very interesting topic for me. And another thing that you mentioned in your article that I wanted to discuss
Mhm.
with you is actually selling photos for prints. Is
Mm.
this something that you do and you recommend other food photographers to consider?
I think, again, this is something that I'm actually seeing a lot of photographers, whether they're shooting food or not, consider right now is selling prints through different websites, or I've even seen people selling prints through Instagram and contact me, that kind of thing. As I mentioned in my article, there are some sites like Fine Art America where you can upload your images and clients can, or people basically coming to the site, they can order those images in a lot of different ways. They could even have that image, printed on a tote bag or whatever. So it doesn't just have to be a print, but food photography,
Right.
makes really nice kitchen prints, and that's something that you can try to sell. And there's also photographers that are selling, prints through Etsy, for example. So they set up a Etsy shop and then they send
Ah,
those prints to the purchaser through drop shipping, basically. So they're not dealing with any of the shipping. The printer sends it to that client or purchaser directly. So that's one thing that I feel people can explore if they're interested in print. I personally do sell some of my images for print, but I do it directly. So people come to
mm,
me directly looking for certain prints, and then I handle that through myself. I find that going through some of these bigger sites like Fine Art America, they can be great for a lot of people, but you really, really have to do a lot of marketing,
right, of course,
right?
because it disappears and it's a lot of
Yeah.
supply basically in comparison competition,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, definitely. So if you're good at marketing or you like to do marketing or you have a lot of time for it, then definitely. And I think the same is true if you want to sell, stock images through your site, right? So we talked about different agencies, but a lot of photographers also sell stock through their own sites, through, SmugMug or Photo Shelter or some of these other web builders that have that capability, and that also requires a lot of marketing, right?
Right.
So whether it's prints or digital files, there's different ways to approach it, but they do require investment of time on your part, and
Hmm.
getting those images seen, right? People can't buy them if they don't know you're there.
No, true.
Yeah.
And then if you sell prints, you deal then directly with the print shop, right?
Yeah, yeah. So there's, depending on where you live, um, or where you're going to ship to, then you would find there's lots of online printers. You can choose a printer in your area that you might want to deal with, or you might just want to deal with companies that are online and that do drop shipping, so they can send it to the purchaser directly. Because if you have to, you know, go to a print shop, pick it up, mail it to somebody, go to the post office, that's a big investment of your
Yeah,
time. And you might not
definitely.
actually be able to sell the print for enough to offset the cost of the printing and basically the work that you have to do.
Yeah,
So I think it's good to have a middleman or drop shipping for that approach.
right. Makes sense. That can
Yeah.
actually help you with that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Mhm.
in terms of type of a print paper, print materials? Is this something that you offer different options or?
Yeah, I mean, you one of the things that when you're selling print, you want to make sure that your paper is museum archival quality, and that means that it's not going to change color or get yellowed very
Right.
quickly because some of these other papers they can do that very fast. So the quality of paper, you want some kind of fine art paper, probably more on the matte side of things.
Yeah, I think so.
So that will really make a big difference on how the ink adheres, and the quality of ink is important. So I think that whether you are going to print for actually selling prints or it's for your own like print portfolio, that kind of thing, that you actually test it out first. So you have things printed from a few different places and compare them before you decide on a printer or where you're going to have things regularly printed.
Right.
Mm.
Okay. And do you see any differences with selling your prints right now with the COVID-19, or you don't see any effects of that on this part of your business?
I actually am not pursuing that right now as far as my business. I'm just pursuing the stock
Right.
photography. And as I
Hmm.
mentioned, I've noticed quite a sharp decline in that in the last couple of months. And I'm hoping, and it seems to be coming up again now. So I'm hoping that's going to rebound. I'm teaching now, I'm mentoring, I'm working on a couple of
That
products.
helps.
So
Hmm.
it's not an area of my business in particular where I'm seeing a lot of benefit, but it is something that I think it could be worth trying for other photographers that don't really have much of a income stream right now from other sources.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And is there any other income streams that you can think of besides selling stock images and selling your prints? Of course, not taking into consideration working with the clients, I mean.
Yeah, so I think it really depends on your level of photography. If you have more of like an intermediate or advanced experience in photography, I think always finding ways to teach or mentor people that are a few steps behind you is always a great idea, because anybody can build an audience, even a small one, will really appreciate what they do. That's one way. And I think right now it might not be a, a conducive way to make money at the moment, but just really looking into creating stronger portfolios and marketing materials that will get you work in the next few months, hopefully when things start to rebound back. So
Yeah.
focusing really on presenting yourself and marketing yourself as the best photographer you can be. I think it's a good time right now because we get inundated with so many other things in our lives,
Yeah.
and some people have had the chance to slow down a bit. So what I'm seeing a lot of photographers doing that are in that position is really taking the time to redo their websites and do print portfolios, and also pitching clients, going after clients instead of waiting for them to come to
To come
you.
to
It's
you. Uh-huh.
reaching out in a sensitive way, basically saying, I'm able to shoot at home, I can help you, I can problem solve, let's work together.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's maybe not on top of a client's mind right now, or they don't even think about the fact that you can work at home. And
Mhm.
there's other ways, like they don't necessarily have to be present in the shoot. There's other ways to share with them your progress
Mhm.
during the shoot.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good, very good tip, very good
Mhm.
idea.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, one of the last questions. Don't want to
Sure.
hold you too long.
Mhm. Mhm.
What would be your recommended books or podcasts or maybe even blogs about food photography and its business that you think everybody should just, who's in food photography business should?
Okay. Yeah. So I think your audience would probably be familiar with some of the ones that I would mention. So um, I noticed that you had Lauren from Food Photography Academy on. I think she's a good resource. A lot of people are familiar with Rachel from Two Love Studio and Joni from the Bite Shot. She has a lot of videos on YouTube that are very helpful. Um, I also think that somebody that's been really helpful for me is Christina Peters from Food Photography Club. So she is a professional photographer in Los Angeles. She's been around for about 25 years or so, and she has a membership site as well. But I think there is a perception that it's geared towards beginners, but actually, there's a wide variety of skill levels in that group. And I'm still a part of it. I've been part of it for the last few years, and I just find her really hands on, and she's a really good resource for me to go to for advanced, lighting questions. But
Right.
so somebody really good to consider, I guess, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced photographer, because some of the teaching out there is geared a little bit more to beginners, at least the ones that I'm
Mm-hmm.
familiar with. And one of the things that I struggled with when I was first starting out, as I mentioned, there weren't as many resources, and then as time went along, most of the ones that I could find were beginners. So I think Christina from Food Photography Club, and also Skylar Burt from We Eat Together, he has a wide variety that targets, beginners, intermediate, and advanced users. He has some courses that I think are really helpful. He has a Lightroom course. He has an advanced course about, shooting commercial, beverages, and then
Oh,
also
that's interesting.
a food photography masterclass.
Mm-hmm.
And Creative Live, like Andrew Scrivani, Penny de Los Santos, have a couple of great courses on Creative Live. And I also really like some of the courses at Pro Edu, PRO, and the second word EDU.
Uh-huh.
They specialize in education for photographers, especially commercial photographers, and they have a couple of courses on editorial photography and commercial beverage photography, which are actually um, very high level and quite advanced, which
Interesting.
I appreciate. So those are a couple other things to look at. And as far as books, I think Food Styling by Dolores Custer is a really important book. I think every food photographer that I know has it. It has like an encyclopedia of different food styling tips that are very useful.
Nice.
And also Helen Desjardins' book. I think it's called Food Photography. I'm not sure what it's called actually, and it might be out of print, but that's another one that's like very useful, especially for people that are, beginners and starting out. Covers a lot, not only about photography but editing, food styling, and I think it's a great reference if you can, maybe get it used on Amazon or something like that.
Right. Uh-huh.
Hmm. Yeah,
Wow. That's a lot. That's awesome. Great.
yeah, yeah.
So many good sources.
Hmm.
Okay, amazing. Well, then the last question for you would
Hmm.
be where can the listeners find you, especially if they want to learn more about your coaching and to see your portfolio?
Okay, so I have my portfolio website, but that's more for clients. So the best place to actually find me is my blog. I write a food photography blog, and it's called Gastrostoria. Gastrostoria. So it's basically about, visual storytelling in food, and I cover some of the business side. And if you go to that again, to gastrostoria.com, then there's tabs there. You can go find out more about my mentoring. I have a
Nice.
page there that gives you the details about my program, and then there's also a tab there for my ebook. I wrote a ebook about composition, which is really useful
Yeah,
for especially for beginners, but also all levels of food photography. So you can find out more about that there as well. And the site is going to be getting like a little bit of a, a refresh soon, but for now, gastrostoria.com is where you can go
best
to find me
place.
more. And then if you want to take a look at my portfolio, you can click to that from one of the tabs there as well.
Great, awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. This was a wonderful conversation and I learned so much from you.
Oh,
I
excellent.
had so much fun. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. I had so much fun, and thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.